up, everyone? Thanks for tuning in. We're going to be doing some chords in drop D today. Drop D, if you don't know, is where the low E string goes down a whole step from E to D. If you're familiar with drop D tuning and you know how to tune, you can skip ahead to this time and we'll catch you there. If you need to know how to tune to drop D tuning, let's get into it. Okay, so first thing when you're tuning, I find it's much better to go with your bridge pickup rather than your neck. The bridge pickup is just going to hear your harmonics a lot clearer and you're going to get a much more accurate tune. So a lot of people when they're tuning to drop D, they'll use the low E string and the D string, and they'll tune their low E string down so it's an octave below that D string. I find, again, a much more accurate way to tune to drop D is to use the harmonics. And if you haven't used harmonics before, we're going to place the finger right over the actual fret, like the actual metal fret. And don't press the string down to the fret. Just put your finger over the string and then pluck. And you've got a ringing harmonic. So we do the 7th fret of the low E string against the 12th fret of the A string. And you can hear that this one is higher than that one. And we're going to tune it down until those beats that you hear kind of stop. We'll hear it again. Cool, and sometimes you have to tune it down a little bit, hear the beats again, and then bring the beats back up. So now we're in drop D tuning. Okay, so to learn these shapes in drop D, what we're going to do is take that intro piece that I played and go through the chords that I used. And that piece was composed using a lot of drop D chords. It's certainly by no means all the chords you can use in drop D, but usually when I'm in drop D, I'm in the keys of like D, G, sometimes A, and there's actually a little bit of like the key of B flat in there. So we're going to go through all the chords in that intro, and that's going to give you a good base of chords to use when you're tuned to this tuning. Okay, so for the first bit, all right, for that section we have a D5 and a G with D in the bass, which is a G second inversion chord. The D5 that we play here, I find that this is most often the way D is played, just as a 5 with no third in it. Sometimes people play that third, of course, and it sounds great, but I think there's something really nice and symmetrical about having like the 0, 0, 0, 2, 3, which is D, A, D, A, D. We've got D's on both ends and then a D in the middle, and it's just a nice, symmetrical, powerful sounding chord. For the G with D in the bass, what we're doing is we have the low D open, and then we have the 2nd fret of the A string, which is normally, your G chord is like this, but we're playing the 5th of the G chord in the bass, which is a D note. So we have D open, then A2. I probably muted the D string here, but you can leave it open because it's part of the chord. So that's either muted with this meaty part of the first finger. That's the D string muted. So you can leave it open if you want. And then we have an open G, and then the B string 3rd fret, and then the high E string 3rd fret. So that's our second inversion G chord, a G with D in the bass. So we go through those two chords a little bit, then we have the riff. It's that little bit. And then we go to, this chord is not really specific to drop D, but it is nice in drop D because it leads well into chords that have this. So this chord is going to be the A first inversion, an A with C sharp in the bass. So I'm just playing a normal, like A. I'm leaving the high E string out of it. You sense a theme here. I love leaving the high E out of chords, but you can, of course, keep that high E in there if you want. So it's 0, 2, 2, 2, normally for an A, but I'm putting the 4th fret of the A string in the bass. So we've got the 3rd of the chord in the bass, right? And you can use your 3rd finger if you want for that chord. But this chord actually sounds kind of nice if you're in D and you resolve it with that. I just chose to leave it a little cleaner without the low D in the bass. But that goes to ultimately this chord, although I leave an open string first. So this chord, again, I'm leaving the high E string out. You could bar the first finger and leave it there. But so we have open D. Here's a 5th fret of the A string. It's a D note. 4th fret of the D string, 2nd fret of the G string, 3rd fret of the B string. And then if you want, you can put the 2nd fret of the high E string in there. So, so this chord, it's based off of a C major shape. You know, if you bring it down here, you've got a C, you've got that. But the thing I love about doing this on D, you can leave this G string open, like that, right? You can even leave the A string open. That's even nicer to me. And then you have this ability to kind of use the first finger in a little bit more dexterous way. You can play the open high E to 2. So then from there, we go to an E minor chord. Okay, so that little bit is this. Here we go with the E minor chord. Let's take that much. So we have our E minor chord. I play it with the first finger barring the low D, the A string, and the D string, and then I have open, open, open. You can play that by using 2, 3, and 4 all on the 2nd fret, 2, 2, 2, 0, 0, 0, right? You could do it that way, or you can bar it with this one. This finger is nice because if you play this bar, you can actually get an E major out of it, right? Or for the E major, you could do this. So what I was doing there is just 2, 2, 2, 1, and then open, open, right? Or you could do 2, 2, 2 with fingers 2, 3, 4, then the first finger, and then open, open. So I don't play the E major there, but that's a great way to play your E major chord. So from the E minor, I actually play an E minor 7 in this spot. So the way I'm doing this is, again, just the bar, 2, 2, 2, then open G, and then I'm using the pinky on the 3rd fret of the B string. And then I use the open high E string. You could do this kind of E minor 7, where you've got fingers 3 and 4 on the B and the high E string, but I choose to leave the open E in there. All right, and then from there, we go to a first inversion D chord. So we have the 3rd finger on the 4th fret of the low D, and this is our F sharp note. This is the 3rd of the chord that we're playing in the bass here. And then I choose to mute the A string with that meaty part of that 3rd finger, but you of course can leave that that string open. It'll work because A is part of the chord, but I choose to mute it just to clean it up a little bit more. And then we have the open D, so it's 4, mute, open, 2, 3, and then of course I leave the high E string muted on that. I just prefer to have the tonic of the chord right there. Okay, so from there, we're going to a G chord. Now, G is a great chord to play in D. There are a lot of options for your G chords. This is a G5 that we're doing here. Let's hear this part. So yeah, I hammer on into this chord from 4 to 5, because remember we came from this chord, so 4 to 5, and then I just go for the G5 here, which we have 5, mute on the A string, open D, open G, 3rd fret of the B string, and then muted high E. So there's our G5 chord. And then I go from the G5 into a G minor, right? So the G5 doesn't have a 3rd in it. It's neither major nor minor. And the G minor, of course, has the 3rd fret of the G string in there. That's a B flat note. It makes it minor. So I've got 5, mute, open, 3, 3. Great sounding chord in drop D. And if you wanted to make this chord major, which I don't think I do in this piece, I might later on, but the 2nd finger plays the 4th fret of the G string to make this major, right? That's one way to make this G chord major. So in this shape, you've got G5, G minor, G major. You've also got in your G5, you could use the high E string 3rd fret, or you could open up the B string and then play the high E string 3rd fret that way. This is a much more folky sounding G, right? Really opens it up a lot. Okay, so from the G minor, let's listen on a little bit. Okay, so from the G minor, we go back to the first inversion D chord, And then we go up to this shape. This is the shape that I showed you before with the G string 4th fret in that 2nd finger, where it's a G chord. I move it up 2 half steps, 1 whole step, to A. And here I muted the D string, so you can't hear that D string in there. So you have like 7, 7, mute, and then we have the 6th fret of the G string, and then 5th fret of the B string. So there's our A chord, right? And, as you guessed, muted high E. If you wanted to play the full chord, you could bar and play the 5th fret of the high E string there. And then from there, we're going up 2 more half steps. If we just kept that shape, it would be B major. Again, with the muted D string with the meaty part of the pinky finger. But we need a B minor. We could just do this, kind of like we did with the G, but I love open strings in chords, so I took that opportunity to open up the B string. I still have the 3rd of the chord, the D note here, and we actually have a doubled 3rd here. The 3rd of a B minor chord is D, so we have 2 3rds in that, and then we have, here's the root here, here's another root there. So this full chord, it's a very open, kind of complex sounding B minor chord. Okay, and let's listen on from there. So from the B minor, we go down to a B flat chord. And this B flat chord is fretted. We have the 8th fret of the low E, 8th fret of the A string, open D string, and that's actually all you need for a B flat chord. You've got your root, your 5th, and your 3rd of your chord. And then we're doubling the 3rd here, right? It's actually the same 3rd, B minor and B flat major share the same 3rd, right? So we're doing that doubled D note in there. And then we're just playing the 6th fret of the B string, right? And then we do have the muted high E. If you play the open high E in this chord, it's a really interesting chord. You have it's got a raised 4th in there, so it's like a sharp 11, right? Interesting chord. So then from that B flat major chord, I just bring the bass note down. I bring up my middle finger to the 7th fret. And this is something you can do with all these chords. You can always just bring the middle finger up and go to the half step below the root and just get a walk down, because that's what we kind of do, a bass walk down here. And then we go down to G minor. So now the G minor is kind of in a different context, because it's actually, we've kind of shifted into the key of B flat major, where G minor is actually native to that key. So yeah, we have a G minor again, and let's listen a little bit more. Okay, so from that G minor, we just go into this chord. What is this chord? This is actually a D minor chord in first inversion. So here's our D5, we just had that, right? We played that chord earlier in the piece. We're going to the 3rd fret of the low D string, which is an F note. But D minor, of course, is that. Or we could do D minor like this, playing this note an octave low down here, and play 0, 0, 3, 2, 3. That's a really nice D minor chord there. But I'm taking it a step lower, not a step, but an octave lower, bringing that 2nd finger down to the 3rd fret of the low D. And of course, we could play it with the open A string in there, but it's a little too thick down there, so I mute it with the pad of the 2nd finger. So we have 3, mute, open, 2, 3. So that's our D minor chord in first inversion. Okay, so we're on our last little stretch here. If you've been playing guitar for a while, you've probably been asked, or you've asked the question of, what's your favorite guitar chord? And it's a silly question in a lot of ways, but I kind of have an answer, and it's this next chord, so I had to fit it in here. This chord, and you can only play it really in drop D, is an E flat major 7th chord. So we have 1, 1, 1, 0, 3. I'm barring the 1, 1, 1, right? And then I've got open G, and then 3rd fret of the B string. So that's our E flat major 7th chord. So we go from that E flat major 7th to this chord. This is interesting. It's an E minor 7, but we're actually doing a sus4. So it's an E minor 7 sus4. And I guess you could just say E7 sus4 because it's neither minor nor major until the sus is resolved. It doesn't have a third in it. But that's our chord. Actually, though, I hammer on the G to the A note, open G to the 2nd fret. So it actually is a E minor 7 sus4 because for a moment, it is minor, right? Sorry, I didn't realize that until now. But yeah, we've got the E minor 7 sus4. And then I bring these 2 fingers down for 3, 3, and then I'm muting the D string, and then I have 2nd finger on the 2nd fret of the G string with the 1st finger on the 1st fret of the B. So we have that. Right? And I'm opening that up. So that's basically like an F chord here. And then when I go to that, we're adding in the sharp 11 to that chord. And then the last little bit. Okay, so from that F sharp 11, I'm using that note, I'm letting that note ring out, and then going to a G chord, which this is a B note, so when you let that sharp 11 of the F chord, which is really dissonant, flow into a G chord, it's kind of a nice third, so you get a little resolve on that. So here's our G, and then I let that ring out, and this G, I'm just doing a 1-fingered G. I have 5th fret with the 3rd finger, muted A, open, open, and then that B string is ringing out, and as you guessed it, open high E is muted. From there, we let this chord ring out, and I play this little riff, open D so I can get to where I want to go, and this chord is the one we talked about earlier. This is the D at 11. So we've got that open G string in there. And then, so it's open, open, 4, open, 3, and then I come up to the 5th fret here on the B string, and then I just strum the chord up to this, which is basically just a D chord, right? So we have open, open, 7, mute, 7. Okay, so those are all the chords in the piece. Just a few extra little chords in drop D that I think are really nice. If we stick with our theme of just playing some D chords, this is one of my favorite chords to play in drop D. I didn't get to it once in that piece, but so we have 0, 0, 4, that's our 3rd, right? And then we're gonna play the 7th fret of the G string. All right, so that is just a straight up D chord. It's very deep sounding voicing, but it kind of ends cleanly with the D note up top. So that chord voicing actually works really well to go into like a D major 7 if you drop this 7th fret down a half step to 6. Sounds a little bit like the Everlong chord, but we've got the extra open D in there for that, right? Okay, the other thing that we can do with this is do a sus4, where this 4th fret comes up to the 5th fret, right? That's a D sus4. Open, open, 5, 7. That resolves down. We could also do D7, right? Which is nice. So we can get a lot of our D chords just with this little shape. So we have 0, 0, 4, 5. That's our dominant 7. And then kind of a cool thing that we can do is play. This is, you can think of this 2 ways. This is the major 7, this is the sus4. If we do the major 7 and the sus4 together, we have that. It sounds really good with the D in the bass as a drone, but this is actually just an A7 chord, right? So really useful little position there that we can use. So most people know these shapes, but they're good to mention. We have just like a basic 5 chord. We can even take it up here. This is basically this chord moved up with a bar here. So we've got 5, 5, 5, 7, 8, right? Very full sounding 5 chord. You can take the pinky out have it not quite as bright, right? And you can take this note out and have it even less bright. So there's a lot of variation within this that you can use. If we take this shape a little bit further, we can do a major chord from here. So we have 5, 5, 9, right? That's just a G major chord, right? And then if we take this 9 and move it down to 8, we have a G minor chord, right? So major and minor. If we just do a little riff like if we're saying the key of A minor, there's A minor to G major to F major, go down to D major. Just a short little chord progression. You can use these chords to really go through any key because they're totally movable. This is a nice C chord. Most of your C chords don't really change much in drop D because you need to control this, and if you want to get the G in the bass of a C chord, you have to do that and leave the B string out of it, unless you want to C major 7. No, let's put that one up. So yeah, C major 7. Again, high E string would be that. All right, so another C chord that works pretty well is we have, just like these, the G chord, the B minor. If we take it 1/2 step higher, we've got C. If you leave the D string open, you get like a low voicing of a C add 9. The 9 is what's the low voiced. So we have the C add 9, or you can mute that and just get a C, or you can open up the G and it's just a C5 chord. All right, thanks for hanging out and doing some drop D voicings. If you have any other chord voicings in drop D that you think are great, drop them in the comments. I'm sure people would love to see that. And by no means are these all the drop D voicings. They're just the ones that I typically use if I'm in drop D in those keys that we talked about. And the other thing is, always just be creative about this. Don't just take songs that you know are in drop D and play them and try these voicings out. Take songs that aren't in drop D at all and try to transpose them into that key, put a capo in, drop D. You can get a lot of different voicings just because you're in drop D. If you're capoed on the 4th fret, you can grab these notes down here that you wouldn't be able to do. I'm a huge proponent of the capo as a creative tool. As a teacher, it's tough sometimes because people do sometimes use the capo as a crutch, but the capo is an awesome creative tool, and drop D is a great place to use that creative tool. So yeah, if you have any questions, let me know, and subscribe if you want to see more videos from me in the future, and take it easy. Bye.